Greetings, folks. We're looking at Edge Magazine, Issue 1, released in October 1993, and discussing the future of video gaming. Later that will turn into the future of interactive entertainment, but for the first 10 issues or so it was video gaming. Later on they changed that into simply video game culture. That was around 2006. And around 2011 they made it again the future of interactive entertainment. So what you see here is my collection of Edge magazines. And here you go. Just showing off all 310 of them. When they went like this, they changed the slogan, but here they returned it to the original. Okay, so the changing face of video games. The game on the cover I didn't recognize, so I had to look at that. And apparently the game is Microcosm, which I recall being a on-rail shooter with pretty pre-rendered graphics, but rather dull gameplay. And as we look through the Edge magazines of the mid-90s, there will be a lot of them. So, yeah, video games were changing, but not necessarily for the better. We also see that the 3DO will be shown, the Dream Machine. So yeah, what I like about this cover is that the focus is not so much on the game, but on the technology. You see, most video games, game magazines, they feature an easily recognizable game or figure and try to sell that. And Edge, the first couple of issues, they basically showed what kind of technology was in store soon enough. Now later, Edge would go on to be more commercial like that, but this is what they were at the time. What's also cute is that you have £3 for the price of this, but it was also, can you see it? $10 and 900 yen, which could perhaps help you convert the prices for the import games shown in this issue. Okay, let's take a look inside. And we see Edge right in here to the left. I'm sorry for the glare. And the opening column is quite a long one, and it's about how this magazine is dedicated to folks who have money to spend. Now, they don't say that out loud, but yeah, this is obviously a magazine meant for 18-year-olds and older who know games and are more interested in the culture around it than what's on the market at the moment. So that's why it's about the future mostly. So we see the 3DO, which would not really be the future, but hey. There's information about the CD-ROM. Here you have the picture on the cover again, but with the rest of the head. Reviews, a competition even. Previews, and this is a pretty cute part, the future view. What important people would think the future would be like. The shape of things to come, yes. So here, for example, we have Arthur C. Clarke, and he tells how he was addicted to snakebite, which I presume was like one of the many snake variants back in the day, and later further popularized in the Nokia phone. But yeah, he's concerned about the addictive nature. I guess some of that came true. What George Lucas has to say is very interesting. He talks about a information superhighway. Whoa. And it will be one of the greatest technological developments of the 20th century, but someone will still have to fill up the highway. It won't be a new entertainment form, but a more sophisticated version of what exists now. It's kind of cute how he wonders who's actually going to fill the internet with content. Well, that's people like me and you, right? I'll zoom in to see what the other people have to say about the future, but I won't go into them otherwise. You can pause the video for yourself. I hope it's sharp enough. Which brings me to the next point. So a little quick intermission. You see, I've already done this video on the original Edge magazine, but I did it using my iPad, which apparently only had 240p. And I got complaints that it wasn't sharp enough. So I'm redoing this video with my phone, which has 720p, and that's a bit sharper. That's nice. But I won't be doing a remake of issues 2 to 11 yet, until I get to the very end probably. From issue 11 or 12 onwards, it's 720p again, good quality. So if you can't stand the 240p quality, skip to that. Maybe I'll get around to doing all the issues on a higher resolution. Maybe I'll get an actual camera for doing this because I'm enjoying this a lot. But I'm just saying that this one looks good. The next couple will be bad, and then around issue number 11 they start looking good again. Probably 12. Okay, so we see the CD32 competing. That's why they have old enemies competing with the Jaguar. Ooh, so that's kind of like the Atari ST versus the Amiga, which was a competition in the late 80s, early 90s. And yeah, both are very positive about what's probably going to happen. Here's Sam Tramiel saying that the Jaguar will be the future. But both of them flopped. That's just the way it is. Yeah, we have the multi-tap for the Mega Drive, aka Genesis. Attract mode we see quite often in Edge in the early issues, and it features the cinematics of games. And in this case, the game is the Last Starfighter. So Edge totally in love with the possibilities of CD-ROMs and Silicon Graphics workstations and the like. What's this article again about? Pirates and TV? Oh well, I didn't take the time to reread this article, and now I've already forgotten what it was about. It's quite a big thing. There's some talk about the Saturn. What's interesting is that they mention how the Saturn can only display 16,000 polygons per second, unlike the arcade board for virtual racing, which could do 180,000. And they're already concerned about, well, maybe that's not enough for 3D games, and they would be right. So, can we get a sharp image again? Let's continue with Hollywood entering the FMV arena. Now the known actors like Donald Sutherland would be actually seen in video games. This would not be the future because we would be using CGI mostly, but sometimes famous actors play for video games. This book called Game Over, which was very good, gets a 9 out of 10, and it discusses quite the history of video games, and it's 445 pages, and one of the first games about video game history. So that's cool. I do think the Ultimate History of Video Games by Kent was better, though. Okay, so the CDI being shown, that was also a thing at the time. And Eye of the Beholder, well, that's being released for the Super Nintendo. Not a very popular RPG. So yeah, more talk about the FMV. Laser Active, now that was a flop, even bigger than the CD32. That was a system that could play pretty much everything, including Laserdisc. And I think they had 1 or 2 games for it, which were also mostly on-rail shooters with pretty graphics. So good luck collectors finding that. Here's some news that might have influenced Nintendo's choice to go for the cartridges on their Nintendo 64. Namely, that the cost of cartridges was going to lower, which would make them more competitive with CDs. Now, CDs would still remain much cheaper, of course, but the price of making video games increased. So the promise of CD games becoming really cheap never really came out. So Edge immediately also has its own conference called the Future Entertainment Show. Oh, it's the second one apparently, and they're advertising that. Good. So here, this is interesting because Edge being focused on the industry and adults, they actually have a date book of all kinds of conferences you can go to. The like I said, the Futuretainment show, the VR show, the ECTS, big one. So yeah, this was a magazine for the industry, and a lot of industry interviews. Here we have the release dates, and Edge hasn't done that much more in the future, so we'll skip that. Now the charts. It's kind of hard to read because a lot of them are turned around. I love it how the Mega City has its own chart, and we have number one Night Trap. Don't think it's a good game because it's number one, but there it is. The Day of the Tentacle here for the PC. Is that Starwing? Yep. Syndicate. Street Fighter Turbo for the Super Famicom, number one. Not yet released here in Europe. And Mega Drive is Jungle Strike, all classic games at number one in mid-1993. So there's even a top 5 of classic games. R-Type Paradroid, Street Fighter Turbo, Super Mario Bros. 3, and the Sentinel. Yeah, the Sentinel. So I'll even have a top 5 for intro sequences with number 1 Microcosm and number 2 Selfie. Okay. So on to the preview section, and we have Dungeon Master 2, which, sequel to the popular in Britain Dungeon Master game, which was a bit older, and Part 2 didn't add much to the formula and was considered a flop, unfortunately, but Edge was looking forward to it. I guess some of the editors there were quite addicted to it as a kid. You'll notice that Edge magazine has a very subjective view of video gaming first couple years. Very British to start out with, but some of the games just simply get way too much attention while others don't. Forgotten Castle, I don't think this game was ever released, but looks really nice. Now remember, this was before Doom was released, so people must have been impressed. It would have been released on the PC by Electronic Arts, but I couldn't find anything about it. Same thing with Stonekeep. This one made by Interplay. So, it made the best 3DO games look like Atari ST stuff. Wow. 2-page preview for Top Gear 2. That's surprising. I sometimes wonder if any British people worked on the Top Gear series for the Super Nintendo, because it's a lot like the Lotus Challenge games. And great music, too. But Top Gear 2 wasn't as good as Top Gear 1, so I'm surprised they spent 2 pages on it. Impossible Mission, again a British game. The original is quite a classic for the Commodore, and this version was never released, unfortunately. Star-Lord and F-14 Fleet Defender, I guess 2 games in one, by Micropose. I don't know anything about them, to be honest. So I'll zoom in a little bit more so you get an idea what it's about, but can't help with that. Now, another game made by British people, the Thunderhawk game, probably the best looking game on the Sega CD, and it was a 3D shooter, kind of like Star Fox, and the maker's core design would later go on to make the Tomb Raider series, but first they would make not 1, 2, but 3 3D shooting games for the Sega CD, which all looked really nice. But yeah, Sega CD, who played that, you know? So, Inferno being previewed, another 3D shooting game with some sim elements, but not that much, and made by Ocean, so probably also made by British people. And it looked fantastic, but half of the screen was taken by your cockpit, and there wasn't much to do, just fly around and shoot. So, and I believe Doom was already released by this game was finished, so not that interesting really. This might be TFX. Yeah, that was a flight sim. Well, it looked very good. We have Jurassic Park for the PC, and I found it very hard to find information about this. It was like a 3D shooter like Doom, or more like Wolf 3D, but it did have the gun at a 45-degree angle. First time I've seen that in a game. And there's also talk about the Super Nintendo version, which isn't a bad game, but nah, not that interesting. First time I saw something like a corridor shooter action on a Super Nintendo game, but nah, it was slow and jerky. You couldn't save the game or use passwords, so it was just too big to finish in one go. Most people consider the Genesis version better, mostly because you could play as a velociraptor. Okay, Rise of the Robots being shown the first time with fantastic looking pre-rendered graphics, and as I hope you know, it turned out to be one of the greatest flops of all time because it played like a very dull single player fighting. It was more like Street Fighter 1 than anything else. Horrible controls, only one character, bad AI. So yeah, the game was it looked kind of like Donkey Kong Country gameplay, graphics wise, but other than that, it was just complete crap. And it was released for almost every system. So here we have two Castlevania games. One of them, Rondo of Blood, here called Dracula X, which was become an instant classic. The first Castlevania, the second Castlevania after Castlevania 2 to have more of a adventure style kind of gameplay with multiple pathways. Widely hailed, but only on import for the West. And there's Castlevania Bloodlines for the Mega Drive, which was maybe the best arcade-like Castlevania game. So two great Castlevania games coming out. I prefer Bloodlines to Castlevania 4, to be honest, even though Castlevania 4 looks better. So, Landstalker. Probably the best action RPG for the Mega Drive in the Legend of Zelda vein. So, definitely worth checking out. We have Wise 4, another action RPG, more combat orientated. And Mario and Wario, this was never released in the West, I know that. The Mega Drive version of Virtual Racing, which would be very expensive because of an additional chip, just like Star Fox, but it did do pretty well. World Heroes for the Super Nintendo, rather generic. And we see a screenshot of Samurai Showdown, which would become, together with Street Fighter 2 Turbo, the best fighting game around. It's also Twin Bee, a cute-looking side-scrolling shooter. Okay, an advertisement for crappy joysticks and lots of British games like Turbo, Lotus, Flashback, which is French, I believe. Correct me if I'm wrong. Zool was British. Sensible Soccer, of course. Okay, the 3DO. Oh, excuse me. Trip Hawkins shown here for the first time, and he was enthusiastic about making a console that would replace all other consoles, kind of like the VHS would replace all the other videotape players. And well, 3DO wasn't perfect yet. It would just become another video game system, but without the marketing power of Sony and not having enough good games. So here's a index of all the CPUs, and it wasn't that powerful actually. It was okay doing 3D for the time, but 2D wise it wasn't much better than the Super Nintendo. It did have good sound though, so that counts for something. Electronic Arts would make most of the good games for the 3DO, sports games, but also Road Rash and Space Hulk, for example. Here we see Road Rash coming out. Football game, also a good one. Maybe the best game for the 3DO was Need for Speed, also by Electronic Arts. Crystal Dynamics also made a couple of good games for the 3DO, but that's pretty much it, really. On the other hand, I think that the 3DO library is underrated, to be honest. There were quite a lot of good games, not excellent games, but good games for the system. And but by late 1995, everybody wanted a PlayStation, but the 3DO had at least 10 games worth every dollar you spend on them. But the 3DO itself cost $700, so that was very expensive. Here you have Crash and Burn, one of the release titles. Not that really good. Looks pretty cool, but yeah, you rode around fast and shot at things. Which game is this? Namco making Galaxian 3? I don't know. Let's continue. So here we have Total Eclipse. I believe that was a game like Star Fox. Yeah, one of the best looking games for the 3DO. Interplay also making games apparently. I don't recall any of their games. We see Magic Carpet here. What's that? I don't think that was released for the 3DO. Battle Chess, well, nobody cares about that, right? So Interplay, not a big player in the 3DO. Here you have Out of This World. That was released for the 3DO, but yeah, more the same. Not a reason to get that. On the right we have the Manga Commercial, and there would be a lot of every month would have a commercial by Manga in Edge magazine, which has something to say, I guess, about video game culture at the time. Okay, so here's an article I didn't really bother reading. It's about the sound possibilities of video games, like Dolby Surround. And they try to make sound like words. So, but here's basically the guide for possibilities, and some important people in the especially British video game scene, like Yes Sam, who worked for Argonaut, talking about the possibilities, I guess in this case for the Super Nintendo. And this fellow, he made a Turrican, Chris Housebeck, so that's a cool guy. He gets through your glasses. So yeah, here's some prices for things you could do to improve your sound quality. And here is the competition of this month. I don't think Edge did that many competitions, but here, if you, what did you have to do? Can I see it quickly? Oh yeah, we mentioned 10 games for home consoles that support either all kinds of sound systems. Name them. If you mention them, you could send them and maybe win the sound system. Okay, so the making of Microcosm, that pretty looking Unreal shooter. A lot of talk about Silicon Graphics workstations. Mentioned there were $10,000, or pounds actually. And notice how Edge is really a magazine for people making games, so that's why they talk about all this technical stuff, about how many gigabytes things cost, and how do you create the 3D graphics, things like that. Not that interesting for most consumers, but that's okay. So this is a picture of somebody, by the way, and for some reason they start discussing the FM Towns Marty here on the right. And that was, I always considered it to be the like the Japanese version of the CD32, because you had the FM Towns computer, and then the Marty came out, which would be like a way to play games at home with only a console, and obviously it was a flop. So more talk about sound. No, yeah, we'll talk about the soundtracks in the game, but still talking about Microcosm as if it was going to be the next big thing. Game costing nearly $1 million to make, which was extremely expensive at the time. Wow, this article keeps going on and on. Notice also the credits. This is something Edge would used to do. Basically name the people who worked on the game. Okay, so one of the few normal advertisements for Edge magazine. Here we have Cybernator, a above average action platforming shooting game. And on to the review section. So now Edge did something very strange the first issue, and they never did it again. They gave the reviews with less pictures, and then later on they would give the review again with more pictures. You'll see soon enough. Well, at the time, there was a summer 1993, and everybody was into fighting games. So we have the Super Nintendo version of Street Fighter II Turbo getting a 9 out of 10. And Street Fighter II Champion Edition for the Turbo, for the PC engine, also known as the TurboGrafx 16, and that's getting an 8. A very good conversion, but it wasn't Turbo, which had all the extra moves and speed. Now what I like about Edge, and a lot of people make this mistake, they also call it Championship Edition, you see. For years on end, I called Street Fighter II Champion Edition Championship Edition. I don't know, all my friends called it the same way. And it's just something that kind of stick with you, kind of like the Bernstein beers. And yeah, I mean, I fought Street Fighter tournaments, and we were all wrong apparently. And I love it how a lot of other people make the same mistake. Mortal Kombat 2 for the Super Nintendo, without blood, but still a better looking version than the Genesis version. Gets a 6 out of 10. Should have been maybe lower, I don't know. Most reviewers at the time gave the game a 9 because, hey, it's Mortal Kombat, super cool. But Edge was critical enough to just give it a 6. Still a kind of crap fighting game, especially the console version. Mortal Kombat 2 was better, but still, nah. Okay, so Gradius 2 for the PC Engine, getting an 8. This game must have been quite old in the arcades by now, but nice conversion for at home. We have Selfie. I've never played this game, but it used CD technology for some reason. Mega CD game, and it gets a 7. Was this game made by Treasure? I'm not sure. Okay, then we have Inca, which was kind of like Myst, if I'm correct. Also using CD technology. A lot of puzzles in the game. And Edge gives it a 7. One of the few CDI games that was actually pretty good. Egg of the Dolphin, the Mega CD version, getting an 8. I don't know if it was much different than the Genesis version. Lands of Lore, a fairly good role-playing game, especially for 1993 for the PC. Gets an 8. Yeah, look into that if you're into old-school RPGs. Viewpoint for the Neo Geo, getting a 7. Yeah, it was kind of cool for its isometric view, but other than that, I've never considered it an interesting shoot 'em up. And Sunset Riders for the Super Nintendo, which was better than the Genesis version because it had more levels. And this one gets a 7. You could play co-op. Maybe it should have gotten an 8, but Edge has so far been quite on track when it comes to giving grades to games, but here they got it totally wrong. You recognize it? It's Gunstar Heroes, and they give it a 6 out of 10. Can you believe that? This should have gotten a 9. Maybe an 8, but definitely a 9. Maybe still the best platform shooting game ever made. High-paced, really cool weapons to try out, simultaneous multiplayer, everything you could want from a shooting game. And it's made by Treasure. It's the first game by Treasure. So, what's not to love, right? Super Mario All-Stars, still at the time called Mario Collection, gets an 8 because it's import. Rainbow Islands is released for the PC Engine CD. I don't know why the CD was needed, but yeah. I've never played this game, to be honest, but it's a pretty cool platform game at the arcade. It was on every console, also the ZX Spectrum and all that. Most versions had 2-player simultaneous play, which was a lot of fun, kind of like Bubble Bobble. But this version doesn't, so I'm surprised it still gets a 7. Maybe it would have gotten a 9 if it had the 2-player option. Zombies Ate My Neighbors for Super Nintendo, another 2-player co-op game, and a lot of fun. Really cool style, better than the Genesis version also. It only gets a 6, should have gotten an 8, maybe a 9, but bit low grade there. Super Family Tennis gets a 7. I don't recall this game being very good. I believe SNES Drunk looked at it and was like, not that good. And Pinball Dreams, another classic. One of the first successful pinball games for at home on the PC. And it got an 8 out of 10, and I think that was right. A lot of reviews in the first issue. Rocket Knight, one of Konami's best action platforming games. And gets a 7. I would have given it an 8. But yeah, Konami at its best at its time. Games like Contra, you could definitely tell the influence. Yo Joe, on the other hand, gets an 8. I guess the writers of Edge love their Amiga games. So I don't recall being that good, but I've never played it. And we have First Samurai for the Super Nintendo. No idea why this was reviewed, but yeah, First Samurai. Okay, so the reviews again, and now with more pictures so that people had a better idea what they were going to buy. So Street Fighter 2 Turbo, better than Super Street Fighter 2 on the Super Nintendo because of